Ms. Ng Ling Ling.
Madam Deputy Speaker, a bright and white hall adorned with beautiful flowers, maybe some warm fairy lights, certainly my favorite hymns, including the Amazing Grace playing in the background, and my family and friends around. This is my dream funeral wake, which I regularly remind my husband to ensure I will have if he's around to see it through. Yes, this is not a typical conversation between wives and husbands, less so for parents and children, maybe even taboo if brought up among some elders in our midst. In a recently launched book titled Singapore Aging, Issues and Challenges, co-edited by a former MP, Dr. S. Vasu, the final chapter dealt aptly with end-of-life issues and is titled Every Ending Requires Planning by co-authors Lee Gyok Ling and Chi Y-E. I cannot agree more. A 2014 survey by the Lian Foundation found that 77% of Singaporeans wanted to die at home. However, as of 2017, only about 30% did so, with other 70% dying in hospitals, nursing homes, hospices, and other settings. While the percentage who pass away at home improved to 39% in 2022, it is just some distance away from the desire of most Singaporeans. Without destigmatizing the conversations on end of life and normalizing the understanding, decision-making, and support for Singaporeans to die with dignity of their choice, most of us will not be able to fulfill our final wish of the most definite event of our life. With a fast-aging population, this can increasingly be an issue. I will speak on two aspects of enhancing choices and dignity in end of life, namely one, destigmatizing the conversation and simplifying the planning, and two, increasing primary and community care options for supporting wishes of dying at home as far as one prefers. My health GPC colleague, Mr. Ip Hong Weng, will speak on caregiver support and the need for more portability and flexibility in the subsidies for palliative care. Firstly, destigmatizing the conversations of end of life and simplifying the planning. Many Singaporeans may not appreciate the range of decisions that one needs to make regarding healthcare, legal, and financial matters for one who is dying until a loved one confronts death. Efforts have been made by the government to introduce the Advanced Medical Directive, or AMD for short, since 1997, the Lasting Power of Attorney, or LPA for short, through the Mental Capacity Act since 2008, and Advanced Care Planning, or ACP for short, since 2011. When I survey a group of about 40 active volunteers in my Jalan Kayu constituency, serving in the grassroots or at my Meet the People session, averaging at about 55-year-old and above, about a month ago in preparation for this speech, I found that the majority have not done any of these three instruments, with less than a handful with the LPA. When I further inquired on their reasons, most said that they felt that there was no need at their age until much later, or did not associate this as interrelated instruments for their self-determination on maintaining their preferred quality of life and dignity when we lose our mental or functional abilities, especially in the end-of-life stage. Nationally, the adoption levels of these instruments reflect responses of the small group I surveyed. With only about 24,682 Singaporeans having registered for AMD as of 2015, 43,000 having submitted their LPA as of March 2018, although the numbers are growing, and only 4,500 instances of ACP were completed in 2018. I explained to the group of active volunteers why I started annual health screening from the age of 40, because I learned that risk of chronic diseases start from that age, and why I signed my AMD and LPA in the last 2 years when I entered my 50s, because the COVID-19 pandemic showed me the unforeseen and frailty of health and life. However, most important of all, I shared that I only have one son, and the last thing I want is to be a burden on him. My volunteers understood and agreed to the need to sign these instruments for planning. Lucky for us, the lawyers among the group offered free certification to help the rest through the application process. I would like to suggest for the different ministries and statutory agencies, namely MOH for AMD, MSF for LPA, and AIC for ACP, to come together for a more concerted effort in enabling conversations and building deeper understanding around these three useful planning tools and more, instead of community groups sporadically conducting such training separately, and whenever we have a generous enough lawyer who volunteer to do it free. I hope that MOH, MSF, AIC can provide integrated training resources to the network of over 100 active aging centers around Singapore, which will be increased to about 220 island-wide by 2025, to conduct such conversations periodically to help more Singaporeans talk about and simplify their planning on end-of-life choices. Next, increasing primary and community care options for end-of-life support. What constitutes a good end-of-life? A small local study in 2012 with about 60 Singaporeans aged 50 years and above identified, I quote, having physical comforts at the end of life, avoiding an unnecessary prolonged dying process, maintaining sensitivity towards religious and spiritual beliefs, avoiding burden of family, avoiding expensive care, being cared for by a trustworthy doctor, maintaining control over decisions, and achieving a sense of completion, unquote. This brings me to the topic of palliative care. World Health Organization, or WHO for short, defines palliative care as improving the quality of life of patients and that of their families who are facing challenges associated with life-threatening illnesses. WHO further explains that palliative care involves a range of services developed by a range of professionals that all have equally important roles to play, including doctors, nurses, support workers, paramedics, pharmacists, physiotherapists, and volunteers in support of the patient and their family. According to the Singapore Hospice Council, there are currently 9 community organizations that provide home palliative care. I would like to raise a few issues regarding the palliative care support in Singapore. A lack of awareness of palliative care. B, health, social, and community players in palliative care. C, caregiver support in palliative care. And D, cost and subsidies issue related to palliative care. I will elaborate on the first 2 issues, while Hong Wing will cover the last 2 issues in his speech. A study in 2018 showed that only half of the patients with advanced cancer interviewed were aware of palliative care support options. The other half were not. A key indication or expression of preference for palliative home care is done through advanced care planning, or ACP, which I mentioned earlier. However, as I mentioned, the adoption level of ACP is currently still low. A study of the ACP database in 2019 showed that only 1.44% of chronically ill patients took up ACP. WHO estimates that each year, about 56.8 million people, including 25.7 million around the world in the last year of their life, need palliative care. However, worldwide, only about 14% of people who need palliative care currently receive it. The global need for palliative care will continue to grow because of the aging of populations and the rising burden of non-communicable, sometimes known as chronic, and some communicable diseases. These are demographic trends and disease burden challenging Singapore as well. Early delivery of palliative care reduces unnecessary hospital admissions and the use of health services, thus managing healthcare costs increases. We need to step up awareness and access to palliative care options in the coming years. Next, on the health, social, and community players involved in palliative care support. Whether carried out in a hospital, hospice, or home, the support today can involve several different teams and several different care providers. The identification of, I quote, being cared for by a trustworthy doctor, unquote, in the study on good end-of-life components, which I mentioned earlier, is an important one to note. In this regard, can family doctors be gradually enabled to become a central player in providing home palliative care for Singaporeans who prefer that? The idea is in line with the spirit and principle of Healthier SG. the major multi-year initiative led by MOH to better manage the health of our aging population and manage healthcare costs. If we succeed in facilitating for Singaporeans to enroll and build relationship with a trusted family doctor of their choice for long-term health management, surely this family doctor can be a most comforting main point of contact for medical advice relating to one's end-of-life care, if the family doctors are well supported by home palliative care service providers with integrated workflows from hospitals to homes. I read with comfort the Straits Times article published recently on 1st May titled, "Leaving ICU to Die at Home, Surrounded by Family and Familiar Comforts." I applaud the medical teams at Ng Teng Fong General Hospital for piloting I'm Going Home since October last year, smoothing the workflows from both their ICU and supportive care and palliative medicine units at the hospital to safely transfer patients who no longer want to seek aggressive treatments and desire to die at home to reach home smoothly for their last wish to be fulfilled. My wish, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the near future is for the government to centrally support the piloting of such possibility at every public and even private hospital and hospices, not just in one proactive hospital like Ng Teng Fong General Hospital, integrating the workflows at some point with family doctors participating in Healthier SG. So that in the end, most Singaporeans can have the choice to end our walk on this earth with dignity, peace, and comfort of our home. Thank you.
Mr. Yip Hon Wing.
Madam Deputy Speaker, being the MP of Yio Chu Kang, which is a constituency with many seniors, I have had the chance to attend many wakes and speak with family members. This has allowed me to understand more about their lives, their aspirations, as well as their challenges, so that I can better support them and their needs as their MP. Understandably, the conversations at wakes are never easy. They revolve around the last days of their loved ones, and for many, this includes the need for palliative care. Many of the residents I've spoken to have confirmed that the support for palliative care is still nascent. Many just don't know what to do. This is unfortunate, but hardly surprising. Death is an uncomfortable subject. But as they say, you can fall ill many times, but you only die once. We plan for so many other milestones in life, from marriages to birthdays and beyond. But when it comes to our twilight years, many people refuse to face up to the inevitable. This is also compounded by the belief that death is still considered a taboo subject in our Asian culture. Some well-meaning children may even worry that their parents or grandparents will think that they are cursing them if they bring up the subject. However, we must overcome this reluctance and have an honest conversation about death and end-of-life care. It's heartening to note that clinical protocols in hospitals are being improved, and that healthcare providers are being upskilled to develop general palliative care capabilities. I'm also pleased that there are plans to engage in early conversations with patients and their loved ones on their wishes. Today, I'll focus on what else we can do in terms of caregiver and financial support, and in making palliative care at home accessible, acceptable, and affordable for all. First, caregivers are the bedrock of a community-based quality aging experience. As Member Ng Eng Ling has mentioned in her speech, many people prefer to die at home. Having plans such as ACP, LPA, and AMD in place certainly help to reduce the stress that may arise amongst family members and give clear directions for the caregiver. However, even with these plans in place, we still need to see how best to support the caregiver. As mentioned earlier, many people are still not aware or are uncomfortable talking about end of life. This leads to a lot of dynamics among siblings, each wanting to do their best for their parents. But the definition of best may not be aligned. In the end, there may not be a consensus. A stalemate persists. Often, the ones who are left to provide for the care for those at the end of life is the child, who may not be married. This can bring about a lot of negative emotions, such as resentment and overall helplessness, for being the one left to shoulder the burden alone. So the support for the caregiver must also consider his or her emotional and mental health. In my budget response speech this year, I highlighted that navigating the fragmented landscape of caregiver assistance and services can be overwhelming, especially for those who are limited in proficiency in English. I suggested matching a dedicated care coordinator with a family. These coordinators can guide caregivers to access practical help. They can look out for their psychological well-being and provide timely interventions when needed. Through my interactions with my residents, I would like to highlight 4 areas to reduce the stress of caregiving. First, caregiver education is key. Caregivers need to understand the illness of their loved ones, the trajectory of the illness, and what to expect as it progresses. They also need to know who to call for help, especially during a crisis. This knowledge can go a long way in reducing uncertainty, stress, and anxiety for the caregiver. Second, peer support is also critical. Caregivers can learn a lot from each other. It can be very helpful to understand and have emotional support from people who have gone through similar journeys. Online support groups, even through simple means such as organizing through WhatsApp, is a great idea. But we need to figure out the logistics of setting it up and maintaining it, as well as ensuring that it is accessible to all who need it. Third, caregiver respite is important for those caring for loved ones who may require care for longer than a few months. Can the ministry clarify how many hospice daycare centers for the terminally ill are there? Are they adequate to meet demand? Are there plans to expand availability? Would the government consider providing respite care services for the caregiver or make it more available, like in Australia, where dying at home is more common? Such services allow carers to take some time off and get emotional relief and help whilst ensuring that the patient is well looked after. Fourth, ensuring care for the caregivers. Many caregivers feel guilty taking a break. Some may even struggle to let go, despite family members' offer for help. When their loved one passes on, some may even develop depression if their support system isn't there. That is why all palliative care service providers should provide or link caregivers to partners who can provide emotional support during and after the caregiving period. Madam Deputy Speaker, I move on now to the topic of affordability. It is no secret that healthcare costs can be a huge burden on families, especially when dealing with end-of-life care. Extending the use of Medisave to patients receiving care at home is a good start. MOH has also set a goal to lower the percentage of people who pass away in hospitals. This will require that hospitals and hospice councils offer affordable and accessible palliative care services to patients in their own homes. But we can do more. Currently, only healthcare professionals who specialize in palliative care can assist patients in making Medisave claims. But I understand that there are plans to expand this to MOH-supported home, medical and nursing providers who offer basic palliative care. Can the ministry provide more information on this? Additionally, I'm interested in the progress of the pilot program between Tan Tock Seng Hospital as well as Dover Park Hospice, which aims to provide patients with timely and seamless care across different settings. Are there any updates on this initiative? Can we also consider providing subsidies for professional palliative care giving? Another suggestion is to extend MediShield Life to home hospice care. It is also important to note that the cost of family caregiving is often not included in the healthcare financing model, even though families are often integral to care at the end of life. Let's not forget about the out-of-pocket expenses that can quickly add up. It's not just the cost of medication and supplies, but also transportation to and fro from hospitals. All these frequent necessities take a toll. In addition, how will the shift to a capitation funding model for healthcare help in the affordability of palliative care? Is there a concern that this may lead to undertreatment or denial of care that could compromise a patient's quality of life, particularly for patients with complex or chronic conditions, if providers feel that providing certain services will exceed the budget? After all, patients sometimes do outlive their prognosis.
Mr. Yip, please round up. You have left.
In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I mentioned at the start of my speech that one can fall ill many times, but one can only die once. In my response to the President's address, I asked the House, what is the good life? Today, I would like to ask the opposite question, what is a good death? Reports have consistent findings that majority of Singaporeans would like to die at home surrounded by loved ones. Personally, unlike Ling Ling, I do not wish for fairy lights at my deathbed, certainly not beautiful flowers. But like Ling Ling and many others, I do want to die at home surrounded by loved ones. But I also want a quick and peaceful death without being sustained artificially by tubes and machines and with no regrets. To live a life worth living is to be prepared to die at any time. And if I don't go as quickly, I want those who care for me to be supported emotionally and financially in my final days. I believe I speak not just for myself, but for my fellow Singaporeans. Thank you.
SPS Rahayu Mazam.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank Ms. Ng Ling Ling and Mr. Yip Hon Wing for passionately advocating to enhance end-of-life care. End of life may be a sensitive topic to talk about, but it is an important one that will affect all of us. The reality is that in Singapore, despite clear preferences for receiving end-of-life care and dying at home, only about 1 in 4 died at home over the past few years. So we do need to discuss issues surrounding palliative and hospice care. The hospice movement took root in Singapore in the 1980s. Today, more than 20 institutions provide palliative care across various settings. Our community providers supported some 8,800 individuals with life-limiting conditions in 2022. This is 30% more than in 2017, just 5 years ago. We have come a long way since the 80s, but much more can be done. Today, I will highlight 3 areas of work to enhance end-of-life care. First, improving access to palliative care. Second, better supporting caregivers. And third, normalizing conversations on death and dying. With an aging population, more will need palliative care. We will invest in expanding our services and review our financing frameworks to improve access to palliative care. We have expanded capacity over the years. We will train more doctors, nurses, and allied health professionals in specialized palliative care, particularly in home care. We are also setting aside palliative beds in upcoming community hospital developments to cater to the growing demand. Beyond specialized services, we also want to entrench palliative care as a basic skill set for all healthcare professionals across disciplines and settings. This will require us to change the mindsets and instincts of our clinicians and equip them with the necessary skills and tools. We are working with the Agency for Integrated Care and providers to do this, beginning with nursing homes and home care. We agree that in the longer term, family doctors can play a role, building on relationships forged with their enrolled residents. We are also working with hospitals and palliative care providers to implement workflows that Ms. Ng spoke about to enable more patients to undergo what we call a compassionate discharge back to home. This involves, for instance, providing appropriate training and resources and implementing handover checklists to ensure continuity of care. Mr. Yip asked about subsidies for professional palliative caregiving and extending MediShield Life to home hospice care. To keep palliative care affordable, the government provides subsidies of up to 80% for palliative care, as well as home-based respite care services for caregivers of end-of-life patients. Patients can already tap on MediSave for inpatient, day hospice and home palliative care and make claims under MediShield Life for inpatient palliative care. Government-funded home medical and nursing providers whose patients are at the end-of-life stage will soon be able to make MediSave claims for these patients similar to home palliative care providers. In addition, palliative care providers have done well in raising significant charity dollars to complement government funding and reduce out-of-pocket costs. We are reviewing the overall financing framework for palliative care to ensure that affordability concerns do not deter anyone who needs palliative care from receiving it. Mr. Yip also asked about shifting to a capitation funding model for palliative care. The scope of care included under capitation funding for the regional health systems does not include community palliative care. Instead of capitation funding, the pilot between Dover Park Hospice and Tan Tock Seng Hospital will trial bundled funding for palliative care services across all 3 community settings, for example on a per-patient, per-month basis. Through a simpler funding formula, providers will be empowered to decide on the most appropriate care setting for the patient. The pilot will also trial interventions to enable earlier referrals of patients with non-cancer conditions to community palliative care and care protocols to better support them in community. We have been working closely with Dover Park Hospice and Tan Tock Seng Hospital to refine the pilot design and develop a robust evaluation and monitoring process to track effectiveness. We aim to launch the pilot in the second half of this year. If the outcomes are promising, we will consider how we can progressively mainstream it with appropriate safeguards to ensure continued quality of care. Caregivers are the most critical factor in enabling one to be cared for at home, but they often come under tremendous stress while coping with grief and loss. We have been continuously enhancing measures to support caregivers through this challenging journey. We introduced the home-based respite care pilot as part of the Caregiver Support Action Plan in 2019 to allow caregivers of end-of-life patients to rest or tend to other matters while their loved ones are cared for by palliative trained care staff. Since January 2023, hospitals can also refer patients to the service so that patients and their caregivers can be supported more quickly upon discharge. This takes a significant load off caregivers who often have to arrange for home modification and adjust to new routines while dealing with the grief of soon having to say goodbye to a loved one. Home-based respite care complements care provided by day hospices, which allow end-of-life patients with stable conditions to benefit from social activities and rehabilitation while allowing caregivers to take a break. The 4-day hospice centres today have adequate places to meet demand. We will monitor utilization and expand capacity if required. Indeed, end-of-life patients and their caregivers have unique needs. The Singapore Hospice Council, or SHC, has developed and shared caregiver resources with hospitals and palliative care providers so that caregivers have the information on hand to better cope at home. The SHC will also be setting up a help desk later this year so that caregivers who need advice can call in to receive timely support. Apart from supporting caregivers with caregiving skills and knowledge, palliative care providers also support the emotional needs, linking them up with grief counsellors or support groups if needed. This is part of the care coordination role which palliative care providers play. Over the years, we have enhanced financial support schemes like the Home Caregiving Grant and the Seniors Mobility and Enabling Fund to better support costs of informal caregiving. Other long-term care schemes like CareShield Life also provide cash payouts to eligible Singaporeans. They may also withdraw up to $200 in cash every month from their own or their spouse's Medisave accounts under the Medisave Care Scheme. Through these schemes, Singaporeans with severe disability can currently benefit from payouts of up to about $1,300 a month. Terminally ill patients may also withdraw all their CPF savings in a lump sum under the CPF Reduced Life Expectancy Scheme, subject to retaining a balance of $5,000 in their Medisave account. On top of the schemes and services, we ourselves play an important role in ensuring that we have a good death. We need to take charge of our own end-of-life journey, to be open to discussing with our loved ones what matters to us, what quality of life means, and how we would want to live our last days. We will do more to normalise conversations about death and dying. MOH and PSD set up the My Legacy portal in 2020 to serve as a one-stop resource to provide information on planning ahead and tools such as the Lasting Power of Attorney or LPA, Advanced Care Planning or ACP, and the Advanced Medical Directive or AMD. We are looking at further digitalising these processes to make it more convenient for the public to make use of these tools. MOH, MSF and PSD are also planning a 3-year campaign to increase awareness and adoption of pre-planning instruments with a focus on LPA and ACP. This will be launched later this year and will involve a range of both in-person and digital activities. To complement the campaign's activities, a series of workshops will be held at the Active Ageing Centres, as Ms. Ng has suggested. We are also working with SHC to engage the community through the grassroots, corporates, faith-based organisations and schools to build a pool of advocates. Serving as a trusted source of information, these advocates can plant seeds of these important conversations amongst the wider community and spread awareness of the palliative care. Many decades ago, people routinely spent their last days at home. They would deteriorate gradually and loved ones would gather as their activity levels drop. Medical advancement has given us the belief that all conditions can be treated and life extended. This has led to death becoming medicalized. Many end up dying in hospital, having life-sustaining treatment up to their very last breath, even though this might not have been how they wished to live. We now know that health is to a large extent determined by social factors. Death is, in fact, also very much a social process. What matters to most is being with their loved ones, in a familiar environment, having their final wishes fulfilled and regrets resolved. Bringing end-of-life conversations into our collective consciousness is similarly a social process. It builds on relationships and often evokes strong emotions. If we are successful in building up our preventive care system centered around family doctors and aged care system centered around active aging centers and community partners, we will be able to normalize end-of-life conversations amongst residents, their loved ones, and care teams.
SPS, please round up.
This is not a change that will happen overnight, but I am confident that it is one which will gather pace in the coming years. In conclusion, end-of-life care is a key priority for the Ministry. We have gathered key partners to refresh our national strategy for palliative care and will share more in coming months. But to ensure that Singaporeans live well and leave well, all of us have to play our roles as family members, caregivers and friends and have conversations about what a good death looks like.
Order. The time allowed for the proceedings has expired. I adjourn the House pursuant to the standing order. I wish to inform honourable members that the sitting tomorrow will commence at 12 noon. Order, order.